Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is the inaugural episode of Flight Sim History, where I attempt to use Microsoft Flight Simulator to teach history, geography, politics, and more. So, I'd like to start off with an overview first. I absolutely love Southwest Asia and North Africa as a region. It is rich with history and diversity, and has been the cradle of civilization for a reason. Its particular geography, though, as the crossroads of so many places, has led to a bunch of conflict. And one of those that is currently dominating the news is the 2023 Gaza war, as opposed to the... let me think. The 2006 war, the 2014 war, the 2021 war. This is the most recent one that's currently going on. And so, what I'm hoping to do is arm people with more information about how aid is actually getting to Gaza and some of the difficulties with that. Like, for instance, according to the New York Times, seaport aid comes through Port Said and then is loaded onto trucks. So, for the purposes of our discussion, it will be counted as such. Planes, on the other hand, go to elarish, which is an airport that, if it'll be a little bit more compliant with loading. That is about... let me try and see if I can get a good distance. About 77 nautical miles, so it's about a 32-minute. Alright, we'll time from there. Though, the planes usually now... let me reset that. Come from Cyprus and then arrive there. Cyprus is also where the various jetties that are being built have originated from. I think that's because there is already a significant UN presence in the line of demarcation between the the Turkish-dominated Republic of North Cyprus and the Republic of Cyprus that is Greek. Basically, this is the two-state solution that we're looking for. I mean, it hasn't always been the easiest, but I haven't seen a war in Cyprus in some time. Anyway, I also want to get into some disclaimers about the politics. My stance is that both leaderships in Hamas and Israel's cabinet are insane, and are both committing war crimes. That is a very tough pill to swallow for me, because October 7th affected me. I lost somebody in 9/11. A lot of people in America did. And having that in living memory when you're like 9 is very affecting. So I supported Israel's right to respond to some degree. This response is over the top, to say the least, as President Biden said. But I think that one thing that people need to understand, is that Biden has been doing his best. The guy is 81 years old, and he took a non-stop flight from Washington, D.C. to Jerusalem. Or no, to Tel Aviv, I think. Though I think he's gone to Jerusalem before. But, like, yes, he's in Air Force One, so it takes a little bit less time than commercial. But let's just assume, for sake of argument, that he goes out of Dulles. Because it's not that much of a difference. One offers. I don't know why the flight conditions and time just changed. But essentially, he did all of this in the first weeks of the conflict. I think he's a bit more of an old school diplomat than people like to give him credit for. Like, he's not... It is about the oldness of his ideas to some degree, but it would take about... Well, it says 34 hours, but that's in my thing. It's an incredibly long distance to go across. And he didn't stop. He stayed in Israel to talk to high-level officials, and Anthony Blinken has also been going around town. The important point is that now the ceasefire vote, where the U.S. actually abstained, because we agreed in principle with it, other than a few wording changes, and I think the important place of disagreement was tying a ceasefire to the hostages, simply because if I'm Hamas, I don't really know why I don't stop holding the hostages if I get a ceasefire for free. But that's not what this show is about. What this show is about is attempting to go to Rafah from Elarish. But because of a pretend Israeli inspection, we're gonna then go to Nizana for no apparent reason, and then go to let's see, where are you? Kerem Shalom, which is another crossing. Then we get to Rafah Refugee Camp and see what it's like from the air. That's the whole point of Flight Sim History. It's why I started this channel with the first season of Flight Sim History, basically trying to bring out more fun historical facts about particular places. Like the Aleutian Islands used to be occupied by Japan. This castle used to inspire Walt Disney. Keanu Reeves is from Beirut. That kind of thing. And I do want to do that sort of thing. It's just that this is too important for me to stay silent. What I've done is done my best as a layperson with a bachelor's degree in history and no other qualifications to synthesize different sourcing on what's going on right now, especially when it comes to aid. Because I think that's where people of goodwill can come together in agreement that more food needs to get into Gaza. But we're not entirely powerless here. And it may not be the way that you think. I mean, it is important to yell at Congress, to lobby your representatives, to protest Biden's rallies, because it has pushed him on this. That's what the base is for. What I don't like is the puritanical purging of people who you disagree with from, like, your friend groups because of this. Because a lot of times people do just want to go about their lives because life is hard and we're all trying to survive in this world in our own ways. And sometimes we just don't want to hear about horrible things all the time. But I cannot physically turn off my brain from that because of the fact that I cracked open a history textbook when I was in 6th grade and bent the spine reading about all of the amazing history in the Middle East. At least, as people understood it at the time, like 15 plus years ago, so it probably is a little outdated if I was to look back at it, but empires that rose and fell, mighty cities with amazing art, cultures, Jewish and Islamic, that shaped the world. Like, let's not get caught up in the slogans, okay? We need to have the only way for there to be a free Palestine is if there's a free Israel next to it. And that's simply put because Israelis, many of whom are Arab, by the way, which is important to note to avoid any semblance of anti-Semitism, and Israeli Jews, whether their family lived on the land for thousands of years or they were more recent arrivals from Europe or America, like, these are innocent people who deserve to live in peace. And so, let's go on this journey. Starting at elarish International, which is here, interesting coincidence. Then we'll go to Rafah, which I believe this is approximately where the border crossing is. The interesting thing about Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 for Xbox Series X and PC is that it doesn't show national borders. Like at all. Anywhere on the map. It's just Bing mapped the Earth. And this is the Earth. This is the world that we're all living on. There is no Planet B. We need to take better care of her, for sure. And one way we do that is to erase borders from our minds for a moment and just try to fly. And the one thing I do want to note before I start is that the aircraft that I've chosen is a Cessna 207. Now, the Jordanian Royal Air Force uses Cessna 208s on occasion as light cargo planes. And I'm already seeing a logistical thing where things could be improved. Like, for regional flights of aid to put on trucks, why not use El Gora, which I only just found out existed tonight, and I'm going to look into the merits of that. But the biggest problem, as you'll see, is the circuitous route that aid takes to get in before it even gets in. Like, it's so stupid. Anyway. Let me also see if I remember how to play Microsoft Flight Simulator, because I had basically reinstalled it just for this. And, well, the other nice thing about Microsoft Flight Simulator is we're seeing in real time what is going on with the night condition and day conditions. So we can feel like we're there in the most virtual sense of the word. And obviously, again, I'm just an American history nerd.
elarish Tower Cessna November 8748 ready for departure to the south at runway 16.
Well, I do want to take a moment to take in the beauty of Egypt for a second. I will note that people blaming entirely Israel for the blockade are incorrect because this is an agreement between Israel and Egypt, who have not always gotten along very well, because this land was occupied after the end of the Six-Day War by Israel. But before that, Gaza was occupied by Egypt in 1948. It is not... History is never as straightforward as people want to believe. And sometimes that's frustrating because we like good guys and bad guys, colonizers and oppressed. But people are people, and they react accordingly. They react according to their specific interests, to specific political pressures at the time, to, let me just make sure I'm... Wait, did I take off correctly? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Okay, so that wasn't full throttle. And I probably would fail my pilot's exam. Oh dear. Oh, no, 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 no. I also haven't flown this plane before because I just bought it from the marketplace. But, okay, so we're going to follow this. Stay in line with departure runway during initial climb. This is probably how someone in Jordan would actually fly this plane, except for the fact that I'm terrible at it. Okay, climb angle too low. Got it. I might also need to bring down my trim a bit in order to point the nose up, but I'm only an amateur plane nerd, so I don't really know this plane particularly well. And most of what I've done with Flight Simulator has been with the Wright Flyer, which is terrible as a plane because it didn't actually fly more than a mile at all, but anyway. So the other big cargo planes that the Jordanians use for their trips across the West Bank and trying to airdrop into Gaza, which, yes, is definitely not the ideal form of distributing aid due to air resistance, dragging the package to a different destination, as well as the randomness of it. But, let me see. Let me deliver... Oh, dear. AI control. Yep, there we go. Let's see. If I can align correctly. Just so much desert. I did not realize just how much desert there was. I mean... Wow. Okay, so... We're gonna try to follow the coast, because this is how people fly by sight, especially at night. Though, wow, the virtual stars are really nice tonight. Okay, this is probably what I would have to say if I did this for real. I'm not such a nerd about, call signs and such for air traffic, but it looks accurate to me. Sounds accurate to me anyway. So, this is quite a bit of a ways for a plane to travel. Imagine a truck. The reason why there's not very many crossings, in part, is because of the blockade. But also just because there's not very many efficient roads outside of, like the coastal highway, outside of the coastal path. This is a particular problem just to the Sinai. It is mostly incredibly deserted, and I believe it is currently... Let me see. The weather in Sinai. It is currently 14 degrees, which probably isn't much better in the rest of the area. Just because, you may not know this, but deserts tend to get very cold at night. Why this is, I'm not a scientist in that department, so I couldn't really tell you, but, I will say that, like, that is not very good conditions for people to be in, and, there's very little agriculture in Gaza that before everything. A lot of the geography, a lot of the strategic decisions, excuse me, of Israel have been supported by their tenuous geography. I.e., the Jewish state in the 1947 partition got most of the arable land. A lot of it had been bought legally by Jewish people in the area, or people from abroad, but much of it was stolen. Much of the fertile land was stolen. That is just a fact in the Nakba. And what I'm trying to do here is show that, like, yeah, even before all of this, it was very tough, because, again, Microsoft Flight Simulator will show lights in all the cities of Gaza, despite the current electricity cutoff. There is a bare strategic justification for cutting off some electricity, but the problem is that Hamas has generators, and so that's ineffective. Everything that Israel has done under Netanyahu's leadership has been both morally repugnant and strategically terrible. A lot of it has probably been because he's banking on Trump to win and give him full-throated support to, like, nuke the area and just be done with it, like, or something like that. It's just very hard for me to believe that there's any other reason why someone as congenial as Joe Biden would continually be ignored like this, who is trying to find a middle ground between multiple competing very hostile and at cross purposes diplomatic actors. This is how diplomacy works, unfortunately. When I started out in college, about the same age that people are protesting on campuses now, I really enjoyed finally understanding, like, the difference between realism versus liberalism in international affairs. Because it explained a lot. I.e., that in realism, each state acts according to its own bare interests. This is I forget where this is from, but the law of the jungle, essentially, when it comes to international affairs. Over time, that has definitely improved. From the Treaty of Westphalia establishing the idea that there were sovereign states with borders, to the Congress of Vienna trying to bring some balance of peace to Europe, to the League of Nations, which was not perfect, but gave us the Universal Postal Union, which is the very reason that we have an international economy at this scale at all. That we have international trade. To standardize postal procedures, but was not very good at the thing it was supposed to do, which was stop war. And so the UN came into place. And the way to prevent the Security Council major powers from just withdrawing if they got outvoted on something, like what happened with the League of Nations, when the US decided not to join and Germany just left, was giving the veto, which at the time was an interesting decision because the allies were all buddy-buddy. It took like about a year for all that to fall apart, if that. And so the Security Council veto, I think, should at least be a suspensory veto, if not removed entirely. Like, not permanently just deleting a resolution. A resolution, by the way, that, while passed, is non-binding. Because the UN has no army. The UN has no government. The UN has no coercive power. The only way to coerce people is with a monopoly on the use of force. And the UN does not have that. The UN does have UNRWA, but that has lost credibility in the eyes of a lot of people for a dozen people who ended up being connected to Hamas. Which is very difficult to not have happen, because Hamas is the government. So I'm not one of those people that says, like, oh, don't trust the casualty figures. But fog of war has made things very difficult to assess with accuracy on the ground. That is being pierced by a lot of social media and drone footage and stuff, but in the age of generative AI, anything can be faked now. And so a lot of people just deny it, or don't want to look at it, or a bunch of other things. Any number of things. But, like, there is something horrifying happening here. It's definitely... There's other conflicts, too, that are worse right now. That does not mean it is any better around here. Because nearly 1 million people being forced to huddle in tents while waiting for a ground offensive, which is still being prepared. It is still happening at some point. And they're still getting attacked. Now, a lot of this is on Hamas. And to try to deny that either would be to pander to terrorists. To terrorists. Like, we need to call the balls and strikes here. That's what I bring here, is a candor of doing careful research into the news, bringing in a historical context where needed, and showing you a different picture than perhaps others. Hamas has also committed war crimes. To talk about them in any detail would probably get me blocked or deleted or banned or whatever, because that is very sensitive stuff. But even just in the military campaign itself after October 7th, they have hidden inside groups of civilians. That is very easy to do because they don't wear uniforms, which is against the rules. But it's easier for non-state actors to break the rules because they don't care. They feel like there's a groundswell of support for their ideas. And a lot of that comes from legitimate anger from the Palestinian people. Very legitimate. And then twists it by attacking innocent people across the border down there. Some of the most liberal Israelis were the ones living next to Gaza. And they treated them like animals. Not only that, but they are hiding underground, hoarding supplies with generators. That still does not excuse Israel turning away aid at the gate. Like children's scissors. Okay, what is a guy fighting for Hamas going to do with scissors exactly? Like, apparently that has been a big thing. It's like dual use. I would argue that if Israel had a reasonable government, then they would react to this sort of thing and narrow the categories of items that are dual use. Or, if you're going to have another inspection station in an entirely different place, just push the aid on through from Rafah, and then send the stuff that's a little bit more questionable. This is just all very educated guessing as to how this kind of thing would work, onto Kerem Shalom, perhaps. Maybe not in... Yeah, Kerem Shalom. Let's check that out for a second. Because, well, it's basically another border crossing. Those are the only two that are open and regularly in service. Again, there is a Jordanian...
November 8748. Request clearance to transition to
There is the Jordanian aid, and once they're... And for some reason, once a lot of, when trying to get to the north, it's basically impossible because of the Israeli, of the IDF being obstinate about this, and having to inspect aid from the south into the north instead of just, I don't know, opening a northern border crossing. Now, in the meantime, well, we absolutely should keep pressuring Israel, and I believe that Biden has done that and is not General Bleep Joe, or whatever you want to call him, because of his old school thinking on some of the military aid. It's still mind-boggling, the position that you have to be in to be like, well, you know, we need 500 trucks, but we're only going to allow in 150 a day. Of course, every little bit helps, and so that's why the air missions in planes like these, and in C-130s that the Royal Jordanian Air Force is flying, though I am not familiar with flying big airplanes in this game, and so don't think I would do a good job of it. But yeah, I'm just keeping going until I find... Where is it again? The name of it. See, I have a lot of notes here because this is a very tricky topic to cover well, especially without getting people upset with you. I think that there's been a lot of like, I'm really struggling to find the words here. A lot of not hyperbole, because there's definitely a lot of horrible things going on, but overheated language, I think. That doesn't mean that I'm gonna be someone who's like, oh, you're just an upset progressive, just stay in your lane. Though I do caution that, like, yeah, it was great to register your opposition in the primaries to Biden, but he isn't gonna be a dictator. Just saying. But yeah, let's see. So, Mitzana is what we're looking for. And you can see just how long and ridiculous this flight probably is in a plane, let alone a truck. Like, this plane can probably move faster than most trucks at present. And so, I mean, trucks are the most reliable way to get aid in, obviously, because, well, for one thing, the Earth pushes back, so you don't have to have as big of a vehicle in order to transport aid. Like, you need a gigantic ship for the kind of operation that the US is building with the Jetty that is coming into place. Let me just remap my flight plan here for a second, because I just want to make sure that I have it's on correctly on my map, and I'm not just going into off into the middle of nowhere, though I think I may have proven my point already. Let's see. So, the main point that I'm making is that, well, absolutely we need to get more aid into Gaza by truck, because that's the most efficient way. And other methods, such as ship and air, have their problems. Every little bit helps. And so what I'm hoping is that more and more logistical knowledge from people who are smarter than me about these sorts of things. I may have actually passed it, because the spelling might have been a little different, but let's fly back then. Unless I'm completely incorrect, and Ixana is somewhere down here. It can be very difficult due to differing spellings of places, but well, this is not a peaceful night, and despite what the light pollution over there would tell you, for a lot of Gaza, it is not a bright night either. Again, Microsoft Flight Simulator, a lot of the reason why I like it is because it shows the world as it should be, not as it is. And sometimes we need to see the world as it should be in order to understand how where it is falls short. Because it does. In a lot of ways. And that makes me very upset as someone who wants governments across the world to work for people. For people who are disadvantaged all over the world. Who wants the United Nations to be effective, because when it is very effective. Like, there are so many peacekeeping missions where people are working their butt-offs across the world, including in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which has faced its worst outbreak of violence since 2012. Probably they'll need to go in again to settle things in Darfur, because they're going for round 2 in Darfur, and I am very, very angry and concerned about that civil war. A lot of that doesn't get covered because it doesn't tug at the heartstrings. That's what I'm hoping this series is about. It's not about talking about what's popular, like, or repeating a bunch of vacuous statements, or even taking a hard position on anything when it comes to the world. Because I am a citizen of planet Earth, first and foremost, is what I would like to declare. And one day, I do hope that humanity can come together to overcome its problems. But that day has to be soon, or we're going to have a lot worse problems than this, due to climate change, due to climate refugees, due to war as a result. There is a rise in wars over resources and such, because I think part of this is somewhat about resources for the extreme right-wing members of Netanyahu's government. Let's not lump every Israeli person or every Jewish person in with these madmen, but for a lot of political reasons that are very tricky to get into right now without doing a bunch of research specifically on that to make sure that I'm not talking out of thin air, the parliamentary coalition that has been put together in the Knesset is currently held together by duct tape and dreams. I.e., Netanyahu is appeasing a lot of right-wingers and currently is having some difficulties with ultra-Orthodox people because he wants to push them into the reserves when they had a state-backed exemption for years from any kind of military service in order to do religious studies. A lot of the reason why there was universal conscription was because, implemented anyway, was because of attacks simultaneously from 6 different countries at the same time. Again, I am not letting Israel off the hook here by saying that the Arab countries often act very individualistically in their own selfish national interests to conquer territory. Jordan conquered West Bank in the war of 1948. When they had that territory, and when Egypt had the territory of Gaza, they could have granted that independence, but it had resources, so they decided not to. And the only reason why they haven't, like, the ability to decide the future of those territories is because Israel defeated them in 6 days in a surprise attack. I'm surprised, yeah. To get into even the 6-day war would be a whole stream by itself, so I'm going to try to keep it as basic as possible here for people who may have only been getting their news about the conflict from hyper-emotional influencers on either side. Because I think that while it's important to acknowledge the gravity of situations, it's also important not to just go straight for the most angering words all the time. Because we can talk about getting aid to people without necessarily bopping fellow Democrats over the head for being insufficiently of the faith when it comes to, certain positions. I don't like dogmatism at all. I don't. And I have changed my positions before when confronted with new evidence. Like, I really, really wanted to believe that there was any kind of reason in the Israeli government. Because I knew that Hamas were a bunch of crazies and they would fight to the end, blah, blah. Or at least as long as they could slow roll the release of the hostages. And so I supported Israel's right to defend itself. But again, the response has been way too heavy-handed and random. Now, a lot of what the IDF claims is that they have done their best. And in the fog of war with military objectives, it can be very hard to determine intent. So that's why I'm not as full-throated in, slogans for the opposite direction as I am, or as I am often bombarded by, because, well, innocent civilians are suffering on both sides. That's important to me. This was Rafah. Was. It barely gets any, pop-up from the geometry there on the ground. But this used to be a lot more lit up and vibrant than I even thought. Sure, there are only a few major cities in Gaza due to the fact that it's about the size of New Jersey, if I want to say. Just an educated guess based on something I half remember. But what's Al-Mawasi Rafah? It seems like it's some sort of crossing road place, where maybe people get off onto a particular road to get into Rafah, which makes sense. Again, it seems a lot of the coastal road is how you get around in Gaza, it seems. And the IDF did establish a corridor on that highway, but they haven't always been the greatest about it keeping that. So, again, a lot of the accounting of who did what and why will have to come later when there's actual, like, special rapporteurs and journalists able to be on the ground without getting bombed, things like that. What is important to remember is that we shouldn't have the perfect be the enemy of the good when it comes to finding common ground with people who are, again, of goodwill. I may be slightly biased here, and I will acknowledge that. I have 4 Jewish friends who I am very close with, and they have been very worried, very angry about Israel's actions. They are not a monolith. And so to see things like from the river to the sea upsets them, it seems. But if we focus on what we can do, instead of just raging over the right terms to use, we can do a lot of good, I think. Already, now, without any government action. Because I'd have to double check where this is exactly, but I'm going out to sea for a little bit. Because what I'm sure are dozens and dozens of volunteers from all over the world are in Cyprus right this minute for World Central Kitchen, which is my favorite charity ever. And if I still believed in Christianity, I would submit Jose Andres for canonization for sainthood. Because the guy only cares about one thing: getting people food, which is what we need to be focused on. Instead of like, oh, I'm gonna sit home and mope about Biden not being perfect. Let's work together and get more food. Okay, so the U.S. jetty, the big one that's being built using a bunch of ships, such as the Gerald R. Ford, that are off the coast of the Mediterranean right now, which obviously can't be depicted here. But anyway, it's, this probably was something that was discussed in a lot of meetings for several months as an option. And the reason why it took so long is because sometimes it's important for government to measure twice and cut once. In the private sector, in the non-profit sector, you can afford to do things more quickly because there aren't as many stakeholders. But basically, it seemed like, this is just my educated guess from the flow of the Biden administration's positions on this, that they wanted to go for the easiest, for what they felt was the easiest action first, which was to try and persuade Netanyahu to let in more aid, so that the port is unnecessary because there are enough trucks coming in. There almost certainly wouldn't be as many as pre-war because, again, you do need some inspections, and they probably wouldn't be coming as quickly. But they definitely had a port on the back burner as an idea, and then brought it forward when it became clear that Netanyahu is going to be a stubborn idiot and a monster about this stuff. So, to say, like, Jenna whatever Joe does a disservice to dozens of hardworking people in the White House, but they're necessarily constrained. World Central Kitchen is not. They're only constrained by how much money you give them. And I have donated to them during a government shutdown, during the pandemic, for Ukraine. And so now that they are spinning up this activity, I absolutely will. If you haven't known the good news about this, because all you've been seeing is horrifying imagery, which some of this was shown to people as young as 13. Why? I don't understand. Why is social media allowed to be used in this manner by 13-year-olds? Anyway, the important part here is that now that they're spinning this up, you can affect the situation in Gaza right now by donating to them. Right now. Because Jose Andres is, again, excellent human being. He has built the opened hands? Let me double check. It's very difficult to keep the specifics in my head all at the same time. Open Arms. I was close. The Open Arms is the name of the ship. It, again, because of the nature of how limited sea aid drops are compared to land, it's only delivered about 10 truckloads of food so far. And the Jetty, as far as my understanding goes, was built out of makeshift rubble. Like, they had to flatten down rebar that was poking up from the concrete. So yeah, if I was in a position as a Jordanian air pilot to be able to drop air aid, I absolutely would. But I would also acknowledge, I think anybody who flies a plane, whether virtually or in real life, would be the first to acknowledge that gravity does not work straight down due to air resistance. If there was like some really waiting technology that might help, like, but on the other hand, you don't want to break the supplies either. And then people fight over the supplies, and even truck convoys are attacked, and warehouses are raided. It's chaos right now. It is very difficult for anyone to get aid. And sometimes, again, it can be sold for hundreds of dollars worth. And that doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that Gazans were making $1,500 a year. A year! My rent costs more than that a month in a major city like Washington, D.C., which affords certain privileges, obviously. And I wouldn't say many people who weren't in the leadership were exactly living in luxury. But anyway, so I think around here is approximately where the U.S. Jetty is going to be built, and approximately that away, somewhere, is where the Jetty is. Temporary structures like this are not going to be shown, so it's very difficult to exactly show, but I hope that everybody who watches the stream has gotten at least a little bit more information about the conflict that is a little bit further removed from just showing the horrors. Like, it's you know, it's necessary to see what's going on, but only doing that, while valid to understand the suffering, doesn't give you the broader picture. It doesn't show you what Gaza should be. Alive. Like, look at this. This, again, I did not realize there was this much electricity in such a tiny place. Compared to New Jersey, where it's like all electricity in a lot of places, it isn't accurate to show that, like, there were definitely blackouts even before the war, and fuel was not always the most consistent, if I understand correctly. But I'm gonna keep flying around and talking about this until I'm blue in the face, because it's also important to recognize that in order to see a path forward, we again need to see the world as it should be. And as it should be is free Palestine and free Israel. Period. Like, both nations need to exist side by side. The fact that Netanyahu doesn't acknowledge this makes him an illegitimate ruler, and he needs to be deposed in elections. Which, he did this war in order to keep himself from going to jail. So he needs to be removed from office and defeated in elections and then jailed. For life! If I was the judge, but then again, there are courts for this sort of thing. The International Court of Justice does not have very much teeth, so whatever the resolution said would probably have not been very binding. The only way to have binding anything is with force. Is if the United States wanted to, it really could stop this through military intervention, but Israel is our ally and our main source of information about the Middle East because of various geopolitical alignments dating back to the Cold War, wherein most of the Arab countries were aligned with the Soviet Union because the United States was aligned with Israel. And that definitely got us into compromising positions, morally, such as sending all that aid unconditionally all over that time. Because now, if we cut it off, then it probably won't change much for a long time. And what do you cut exactly? Because I get why people are wanting to say, you know, cut off the military aid, because it makes logical sense on a surface level. And I want that to be true so badly. Oh, well, that appears to be another refugee camp. Let's go over and see. Because, like, Rafah isn't the only place where people are hiding. Some people just chose not to leave. Because they'd been forced to move before, because this was their home, because they just didn't want to have to give up everything. And many of them paid for that. Ultimately. Anyway, when it comes to this, one thing I do want people to be aware of as I find the exact, okay, well, that's not great. The plane was not really behaving the way I wanted it to while I was off the controls, but thankfully, since it's a flight simulator, I don't necessarily need to do much. Anyway, so, let me see, where is it? There's an article from the AP about this that says that $14.1 billion would go to Israel in the broader security bill, tying aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Pacific allies. Basically, us trying to say Taiwan without saying Taiwan, and getting China upset together. Okay, so about $4 billion of this bill. This is from February, so it may have changed. But about $4 billion was planned to go to air defenses for Israel. Separately, there's a 1.2 billion. This is conventional air defenses such as anti-aircraft guns and such that are very inaccurate. Then there's about $1.2 billion for Iron Dome. I don't know why Iron Dome hasn't been talked about more. Because, like, it is incredibly important. It really is. Hamas is still firing rockets from civilian infrastructure into Israel. By the hundreds, by the thousands a day. And so is Hezbollah from the far, far north. To the point where hundreds of people have had to be evacuated. Now, the way that Israel has retaliated in Lebanon by assassinating a leader, that part, okay, whatever. White phosphorus use is an actual, like, definable war crime for anything other than signaling forces. And I doubt that's what Israel used white phosphorus in Lebanon for. Just saying. So basically, okay, so to get back to the top line point, air defenses seems reasonable to me, because they are defending from an air threat. Hamas doesn't have an air force, but they do have missiles. And Iron Dome, also unobjectionable. It's basically a series of smart rockets, if I understand correctly, with a computer system behind it. I haven't done that much research compared to the other aspects for the show on Iron Dome specifically, because I just wanted to make it a top line point. But there's about like several thousand reasons why we should give aid to that, namely innocent civilians in Israel. Again, many of whom are Arab. So it's not just a Jews versus Arabs thing. There are Arabs who consider themselves Israeli, who were taken hostage by Hamas because they just assumed that anybody living in the border towns was Jewish. They also kidnapped Druze people, which is a Christian ethnic minority that is more prominently discussed when it comes to Syria and Lebanon due to the very complicated role that the Druze people have played over time in the politics of Lebanon and Syria, particularly with the messy civil war going on in Syria right now. That just seems like it'll never end. But, like, my main point with that is that Hamas did not discriminate when they tried to kidnap people, and they have in their manifesto a charter to wipe out the state of Israel, which makes it more crass that for his own political gain, Netanyahu played off Hamas against the Palestinian Authority, which has already been, for years criticized as basically being a tool of the security regime in West Bank, in the occupied territories. And then on top of that, like, they just don't have, despite U.S. security assistance to the Palestinian Authority's police, they just simply don't have the training or expertise to be able to handle anything in Gaza, because they were kicked out in 2006 during a civil war. And after that point, there were no elections, and Hamas just ruled forever, because that's how it was, and so that was why the blockade happened. But after that point, to try to consider Hamas a legitimate diplomatic partner in a two-state solution was folly. However, they'd established themselves so comfortably by this point, including their leadership offices in Qatar, which makes what's going on right now even more mind-boggling, because Israel, you have one of the most feared spy agencies in the world. Why not listen to them and maybe go after their sources of funding instead of just military bombardment? Like, basically, part of how I think that Netanyahu's calculus was based on, again, he's a political animal, that's all he thinks about. But part of the political calculus there was that he didn't want a huge number of Israeli casualties in the IDF, because he knew that a large-scale invasion was happening, and that he would need to get this over with as quickly as possible, and he did that by being sloppy. He did. He did. Like, there's no way that you can tell me that there was no way for Israel to have done a better job when it comes to actually taking out Hamas. Because, you know what we have in the United States? A drone that took out the number 2 in Al-Qaeda. but left the rest of the house intact. Not a single one of his family members was even injured by that. If we have the capability to do that, why not give that to Israel instead? But then again, we need to... What we need is a full breakout of what is actually being sent, because all that's being given in the media right now is the top line number, and I had to go to the wire service for that, the AP, which tells me that the media stripped out this information in order to just present the top line number for any number of reasons that are not necessarily sinister or whatever. It's just a matter of the fact that there are parts of this bill sending aid to Israel that needs to be sent. It's just that we need to know what exactly is being sent, because there's still a lot of ambiguity. When there's these 1,000-page bills that even the Congress people don't read, then that's a real problem, because then the American people are less likely to know exactly how their money is being spent either. So then as a result, if the Biden administration for some reason is not going to clarify that sort of thing, then it becomes difficult to support their arguments. That, yeah, we still need to send aid to Israel, but also we're not going to tell you what it is? Like, again, break out the numbers for Iron Dome, for air defenses, for U.S. military operations in the region. Because while that may have been put under the bucket of aid to Israel, that's more indirect, i.e., the U.S. is sending aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford to the region to support its operations, which include building the Jetty. So if that gets taken out from the bill because we're deleting the entire bucket for Israel, then that hamstrings our ability to help, too. On the other hand, again, because of the fact that we gave them so much military aid so freely for decades, they have a large stockpile of worse weapons than they use right now. Because what I'm hearing, and I need to track down the source again, is that they're attempting to minimize casualties with smart bombs of the 500 kilogram and 2,000 pound, of the 500 pound, excuse me, and 2,000 pound variety. 500 pound variety is not as destructive, but the 2,000 pound, like, why? So, again, like, maybe we can tweak what aid is actually going to them and be like, here, you only get to snipe people with drones. You only get to do that. Because, like, then as a result, it would be a lot more precise. I'm not a military tactician. I'm not part of the Joint Chiefs or IDF War Cabinet, unity government. I'm just a dork for American and world history, who, again, not an expert on anything. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt and do your own research, most importantly. You cannot take the word of anyone, even me, who you just found on TikTok live and are staying with. Thank yous very much to everybody who's supporting the stream. But, like, again, double check every claim. Every single word of every claim. It doesn't necessarily mean that what your previous beliefs are is wrong. It's just that sometimes these things need to be refined by more information. And the ceasefire resolution being abstained from was a turning point, I think, for Biden and Netanyahu's relationship. Because up until this point, I think Biden was trying to be nice to Netanyahu so that Netanyahu wouldn't just throw a temper tantrum and kick him out of the negotiating room. When there were hostages to be freed. Which, again, it's sad that a lot of the media coverage does not mention the hostages even. Now, a lot of that is because of the more immediate urgency of getting food to innocent people who are being dragged by the only men with authority around, who, are being told ignore the IDF's leaflets, which are ineffective anyway compared to the cell service that they destroyed. For what reason? I don't really know. Because, again, you know that Hamas probably has internet in their tunnels. They spent a decade collecting like billions of dollars of investments in order to build for exactly this moment. For a heavy-handed Israeli invasion where they could just hide out in the tunnels with their hostages and chill with all the food that they could hoard. Well, their innocent people were starving, and that doesn't mean that every single person who worked for the government there is a terrorist. Again, I think the Gaza Health Ministry, it's not that it's inaccurate because they're overcounting the casualties, though people can reasonably disagree about why you're not breaking out civilians versus armed combatants. But when people are not wearing uniforms, it can be very difficult to count that sort of thing. And it's also very difficult. This whole situation is very difficult and complex, and is not easily solved by just putting a watermelon filter on your social media. I'm so sorry for anyone who thought that was raising money. But it was just going to a bunch of unscrupulous charlatans who were lining their own pockets with ad revenue from TikTok. And the fact that I'm stating this in an unpopular format to do so, and in a place where this kind of view criticizing that is not really shown, means that this will get buried on TikTok. But I'm posting this on YouTube for next day viewing. And if you like what you see here and missed any of this, please be sure to follow me there too. Hopefully the fact that I'm kind of a small channel allows me to be a little bit more frank when it comes to this. I'm just really getting a much different sense of the entire geography of everything. Lots of places named Rafah for various different reasons. I'm a last khanyunis. Let me just reorient myself a bit. And maybe just do a straight flight from the south to the north to show how aid is being distributed that way, in a manner of artistically speaking. Okay, so since we've already gotten into Rafah, we now need to get to warehouses like here. So let's do that. Let's do that. That's makes a lot of sense. And then I can tilt along here, and you could just see how stark this border is, though, because of the very, very large border fence that, was meant to contain people. And people who got no say in that. Because they were, stuck with a bunch of terrorists who decided they would rather just bomb people and get away with it, and kidnap people and get away with it, than actually care about their own people. Like, if you want to support the cause of Palestinian liberation, good for you, but, also recognize that they need new leadership that's actually good. So yeah, and I'm gonna go around here, because that's about where the warehouses are, I think. Again, a lot of it is turned away before it even gets there, but the warehouses situation is hard too. let's see, where are you? Why isn't more aid? Got it. Yeah, this is... A lot of this initial inspiration for doing this stream at all came from a New York Times article that went into more detail. So, let's see. So we're gonna... Yeah, it seems like khanyunis is... Yeah, a good place to go. Just to go a bit more in depth. That was another place that people hid for a while before that got taken over in, I believe, January? By the Israelis? But actually what I'm gonna do, I think, is go and travel the entire length of the strip in solidarity. I had only planned to stream for a couple of hours anyway. I just really needed to get this information off my chest. I did not know there was a Bedouin village here, but it makes a lot of sense. Nomadic people, many of them Muslim, though not all. Yeah, I could see it. Jabaliah Camp. Too many places named camp for my liking. So it seems like the northern border is here, and I will set as arrival and fly. This will take about, if I'm understanding correctly, and the game is a total UI disaster, 8 minutes to fly from one end to the other, and I'm just gonna keep flying from one end to the other until I'm done with the stream, because I want you to see again what Gaza should be like. Full of lights and people and commerce under a government that people trust. The fact that that's still so far away after years and years of attempts is frustrating. I get it. I really do. Again, realpolitik, when it comes to nations serving their own interests, can often get in the way of larger goals when it comes to working as a common humanity. But now the sun's rising over Gaza, which is interesting. And it's just sort of letting me fly in the middle of the sky. I don't really know how to set the altimeter correctly, but this is a high altitude flight anyway, so I'm fine with either plunging down to get more to street level, or
748 contact elarish approach on 125.0.
yeah, that probably would be the air traffic controllers for that, because Tel Aviv is a little bit further north and is the only major international airport that's anywhere near Gaza.
Cessna November 8748 elarish approach altimeter 29.906 radar contact. Continue to Custa.
Thank you.
Approach Cessna November 8748. Request clearance to transition Charlie airspace.
Okay, well,
Cessna November 8748.
don't worry, I think I have control of the plane, even though there's a lot of numbers that are going way, way down. And again, I picked this plane because I do think that smaller planes, lots of smaller planes at tinier airports, may be able to help when it comes to this stuff.
121.4 Cessna 748.
There we go. And now I'm leveling out. This is about where I wanted to be anyway.
Center, Cessna November 8748, 3,700 feet. Cessna November 8748, Tel Aviv Center altimeter 29.906 radar contact. Continue to Custa.
I don't really know when okay, there, I'm leveling out. Okay, so... how I wish that the sunrise over Gaza would bear good news. Again, donate to World Central Kitchen is the most direct action that you can do right now. Earlier on, I don't like to brag about donations or whatever, but I did donate to International Rescue Committee at the beginning of the conflict, and or close to it, once I realized they were the only aid organization other than UNRWA that could actually get in. Which is, again, ridiculous to me. Well, that highway is probably where a lot of aid convoys have been bombed. Ugh. But, like, okay, so then, we're getting to the northern end. It's not a very large area at all. And there aren't a lot of tall buildings or golf courses. Stupid President Trump. Like, with his callousness about this and wanting to turn Gaza into real estate. Jesus Christ. Like, there is no doubt now in my mind, after I wrestled with this hard question for a while, that if Netanyahu had his way, he would absolutely kick out all the Palestinians from Gaza, which, at minimum, is a war crime. At minimum. At best. Like, a lot of the actions that are now being considered plausibly the worst possible thing. Like, before, there were sources that contradicted that because, again, intent is very difficult to prove, and there were minimization strategies that the IDF was supposedly putting in, and I hoped that, whatever the case, whatever the horribleness, it wouldn't be for much longer because Biden would negotiate a temporary ceasefire going into a permanent ceasefire. I still think that's the right approach because the hostages still need to be freed. But at the same time, I do think Biden has to take a stronger hand now that he's been essentially badmouthed for daring to abstain from one resolution. Then again, most of the agreement was there, it's just that some of the wording around separating out the hostages from the ceasefire was a big problem for the United States. But the United States proposed ceasefire resolutions of its own that did more strongly condemn Hamas, and they were vetoed by Russia and China. If they wanted to, they could have let that pass, the permanent members, and then get voted on by the rest, by the other 10 members of the Security Council, the rotating members. Again, I do think the idea of permanent members is a little bit ridiculous and needs to be removed, but this is the United Nations as it is, not sadly as we'd like it to be. A donation to the United Nations could help, or like a purchase from their shop, but the problem is that, well, hello Gaza City, what it used to be, you know, people living and working and cars moving peacefully. That's what it used to be. That's why I wanted to show this game in Flight Simulator. And hopefully anybody's been able to hear me either above the plane noise. I'm sorry, I could have adjusted the volume down, but I really needed to know certain noises to make sure I wasn't going the wrong direction. Very fast. Anyway, only about 4 nautical miles left, so we've traveled about half of this trip now. And part of it is like, we just really need to focus on what we can solve in the immediate term, or try to, which is getting more aid by any means necessary. If Israel is going to be obstinate about this and slow down the inspections and send cars to an entirely other city and then back to Rafah for no reason, then what we need to do is an all of the above strategy, where, yeah, planes aid is random, yeah, police inside of Gaza are getting attacked, and so trucks aren't even perfect, and ships have their problems, but we need to get as much aid as possible out to people. And so hopefully you understand better the geography of the Gaza Strip, of the situation with the war, of some of the geopolitical dynamics and historical pressures that contributed to where we are now. Again, to get even to depth of even one of these aspects would require an entirely different show. I'm prepared to do that. But I also want to do other funner things on my channel too, because like I really wanted to meticulously source this and put it together, and I think, judging by the response, it seems to have been a success. Oh wow, I forgot that I had been that it had been clicked to continue playing for a minute there. Oops. But, well, I think you get the idea, but I think I'm gonna take a few more laps to try to see the sunrise, even virtually, over Gaza. Because one day, I really do hope that as many people as possible get to see it for real. I mean, get to see that the Mediterranean is beautiful. That this land is as well. And that in an ideal world that hopefully will come soon, people will just be able to go about their lives and not feel like they're in a prison, and not feel besieged, and not be attacked. Because whatever the specifics, whatever the chaos, whatever the fog of war, the reason why we're at this point is because of Israeli refusal to cooperate on a lot of things. Or at least to relax some of their policies. Like, and only doing so after extreme pressure from your main ally while the rest of the world is yelling at you. Not a great look for your country. Again, I really do hope that in the next elections, the 80% of Israelis who don't like Netanyahu for various reasons can get rid of him. That doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a far-left government there either, because far-right forces are rising across the world and are posing a huge threat to democracy and the rule of law. In Russia, where people are getting detained and tortured for daring to line up at noon. In China, where the most draconian security law in Hong Kong's history was just passed, basically ending any semblance of democracy or ability to criticize the government. And in Darfur, where there is no central authority because it's civil war between two armed gangs. And Darfur is caught in the middle. Again! It's so frustrating. And of course here, where our erstwhile ally is behaving like a madman. Like, but then again, I am often reminded of the quote from President Clinton. Who's the superpower here? We do need to flex our muscles a little bit more. But basically, again, the measure cut twice, cut once approach, it makes sense when you're the most powerful person in the world and you're dealing with a lot. But I think it's time to start cutting. With that, I think I'll end it. And I will upload this to YouTube and post the highlights to my channel tomorrow. So, you all have a good one. Thank you for tuning in. Okay.